All right. Thank you so much, Jess. Appreciate that introduction. And yes, Braver Angels people, come say hi to me afterwards because that's my passion. I love Braver Angels work. All right. I'm gonna make sure I know how to work this. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Well, I'm going to begin with an introduction. Jess did a great job introducing me. I'll give you a little bit more detail. I am Amber Lewis. I grew up in Britt, Minnesota. Most of you probably know where Britt is, not too far away, about an hour drive from here. I actually, you see my 5 kids up on the screen in a couple of these pictures. I dropped them off at my parents in Britt on my way here today so they could spend some time with Grandma and Grandpa, which was fun. So I spent the first 20 years of my life there. Moved out to Utah as a young adult and went to college. I got my bachelor's degree in biology and earth science from Utah Valley University. And while I was there, I got involved in some interfaith work. So I thought I was going to go the route of research, doing the hard sciences. But when I did this interfaith work, I was like, oh, this is what I love. This is where my passion is, getting people together who have different ideas and viewpoints on things and maybe think they can't even interact in a civil way, be in the same room because they are so different, and helping them build some bridges of understanding and finding some common ground. So I decided to pursue my master's degree in conflict analysis and resolution, which I received in 2020 while I was living in the Twin Cities. So I was away from the area for about 15 years. And then in 2021, I had graduated. I was looking for what can I do with this degree in conflict resolution, and came across an AmeriCorps fellowship with Northspan. And that AmeriCorps fellowship was focused on launching the Welcoming Community Program. And I thought, oh, I've been in Northeast Minnesota. I know there's lots of conflict underlying some of the challenges we have in that area. I think this is a place I can actually use my degree. So I got to start my fellowship in 2021 with Northspan, and then became a full-time employee in 2023, continuing that work. And I'll talk a little bit more about Northspan and the work that we do there, but this is just my introduction, so I'll leave it there for now. So I'm married, I have 5 kids. My oldest is 15, my youngest is 5. We live in Duluth currently, but I did want to tell you all that I have some Ely roots. My mom is actually from Ely, so I don't know if anybody knows any of the Novaks. I don't know if there's any Novaks left, because she's been out of the area for a while, but that was my mom's family. They lived on Boundary Street in Ely. And I tell you that so that you'll like me more and so that you'll trust me more, because we're going to be talking about psychological processes a little bit today. And that's one of those psychological processes. If we find that common connection with somebody, we automatically like them, trust them, listen to them. So that's our intro to a little bit of what we'll be talking about. Let me think here. Anything else I need to share? I don't think so. I think that's about it for me. But I'll tell you a little bit about Northspan. So Northspan's been around for about 40 years. And I never thought I would be working for an organization that does economic development. If you had asked me maybe 5 years ago what economic development was, I probably would not have given you a very good answer. And I definitely would not have said I would be working in that field. But economic development, I've found, is much broader than I ever realized. And Northspan has been doing this work of community and economic development for about 40 years, like I said, and was really launched at the time of the economic downturn in this area in the 1980s, and has been doing that work ever since. We're a private 501c4 nonprofit. So we're a nonprofit, but we're a little different. So we have 2 different branches. We have our fee-for-service consulting work that we do, and then we have our programmatic community-centered work that we do. And we can do that as a 501c4. Our vision is to engage and elevate, and our mission is to be expert navigators transforming ideas into accomplishments. And that's very, very broad. But these are just some snippets that I took off of our website, some different projects that we've worked on. We have all these case studies on our on our website that we've worked on, and you can see the variety. So I'm just highlighting this to show the variety, and I'll read a couple of these off because you probably can't see them that well. We worked, on broadband. It's time to not give up on broadband. Arrowhead Library System strategic planning. We're working with the library systems. Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College. Wilderness health, so working in things related to healthcare. The Mayor's Child Care Task Force, child care. I don't know if I have it on here or not, but we've done things related to housing and food systems, like all of these pieces that are part of making thriving, healthy communities are part of economic development. And so that's why our mission and our vision are so broad, because it's so big. And we really like to look at economic development, community development from the perspective of what are the challenges that we're seeing across Northeast Minnesota in some of our rural communities. Who is trying to solve those challenges, and how can we come alongside to help them solve those challenges in the best possible ways? So we primarily work Northeast Minnesota, Northwest Wisconsin, but we are not geographically bound in our consulting work. But I'll talk a little bit more about our programmatic work, and we just serve Northeast Minnesota, Northwest Wisconsin with our programmatic work. We really specialize in forging these strong relationships, facilitating those impactful conversations that I've talked about, streamlining processes, and sparking innovative insights and actions. And this is our DAWN program. So we have our consulting side, and under our consulting side, we might be doing things like working with businesses that are looking to succeed, to transition. Somebody looking to purchase a business will do things like business valuations. I mean, if you think about if you have a small community. Actually, I think there was a grocery store in Ely, I believe, that my parents used to go to get our potato sausage. And you know how potato sausage is different wherever you get it. This grocery store had the right potato sausage, and they went out of business at some point. And I don't know if the owners retired or what happened. But when we talk about things like succession planning, we're talking about the value that those local businesses have in a community and how we can help them stay in those communities and keep going even after those owners maybe want to retire or move on, and maybe there's nobody else to take the business. So thinking about how important those local entities are to a community. So we'll do things like that. We also do strategic planning under our fee-for-service consulting work that I threw up on the slide there. So that's really thinking about with an organization or a community group, whatever it might be, they have certain goals they want to accomplish in the future, and how they achieve them is really important to start from the beginning with that vision and those goals, and knowing how to get there. What is the roadmap that they're going to get to those goals on? So that's our strategic planning. Under our Driving Access to Wealth and Networks programming, this is where our welcoming community work is. This is where our workforce talent attraction and retention with the Northforce web tool is, and quite a few other things. We work with entrepreneurs and small businesses, many things. I'm going to focus in a bit today on our welcoming community work. So this is just talking a little bit about our work with entrepreneurs. There's a lot of support for entrepreneurs and small businesses across Northeast Minnesota, all at different stages. They all do different things. And so Northspan has been able to be a little bit of an ecosystem coordinator for that work. So we're often the first place that people might come and say, you know what, I've got an idea, or, hey, I've got a business and we're struggling a little financially. What can I do? So wherever that business might be, we have the knowledge and resources to be able to direct them to where they might need to go, and also identify where maybe there's gaps in support and be able to try and help fill some of those gaps. That's the region we serve, as I mentioned. So thinking about inclusion and belonging and welcoming and how this relates to economic development, I'll set the stage a little bit here. Thinking about our rural communities in Northeast Minnesota, we have numerous challenges that we're facing related to our sustainability, future vitality. We sometimes see economic stagnation in our communities. We see challenges with workforce and housing and childcare. I'm sure you've heard all of these talking points quite a bit. Further complicating those challenges, though, is this thread of a lack of inclusion and sense of belonging that can occur among community members from a variety of backgrounds, but especially our community members that might be from some of our historically underrepresented groups. The welcoming community initiatives that are part of the DAWN program address those challenges by a direct effort to build relationships and understanding across differences that have contributed to those widening divides and silos that we sometimes see in our rural communities. We focus on thinking about some of those historically minimized relationships that we then want to prioritize and center in our decision-making. So that's kind of the overview, but I did promise you a presentation that explored the transformative power of community-centered programming in Northeast Minnesota. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is transformative about this type of programming. And I do love, just with the introduction and the announcements at the beginning, to see all of the things happening in this community. So I feel like I might be preaching to the choir, as they say a little bit here. I feel like you have some good knowledge of the importance of community here. All right, so let's look at this from an economic perspective. What are some of the benefits of welcoming? And these things have been well researched and seen in communities across the United States and worldwide. Reversing population decline. When we have welcoming and inclusive communities, we see an impact on population. Related to that, attracting and retaining talent, enhancing collaboration and networking. The solutions that we have coming out of our communities to address different challenges will be better as we are thinking about who we're including in those decisions. Renewed energy around public service. We've seen a lot of conversation in Northeast Minnesota about the decline in civic engagement in recent years, and inclusion and belonging has the power to affect that dynamic as well and bring people into civic engagement. What about from a community perspective? What are some of the benefits you might see from an inclusive community? Reducing economic disparities, addressing unequal educational outcomes, increasing opportunities for influence and connection in local decision-making, supporting mental health challenges, support for mental health challenges, enhanced opportunities to share talents and skills. We want everybody in our communities to feel like they can contribute somewhere. And that's one of the things that we often miss out on. When somebody doesn't feel that connection, that sense of belonging in their community, then they're probably not also feeling like they have a place to contribute. So helping people find those places that they can contribute can not only boost their sense of belonging, but also be a great benefit to your community as well. And then constructively addressing divisions that we'll talk a little bit more about. So where does this start? This starts with learning to understand ourselves. So we're going to take some time and look inward before we look outward, a little bit of self-reflection. Focused efforts for ongoing dialogue, learning, and relationship building with community members can assist in effectively addressing challenges and providing a supportive community environment when conflict arises. When there is hesitancy to step into those relationships due to maybe misunderstandings or gaps in understanding in how somebody might respond or what it looks like to respectfully engage, we can see that lack of connection leads to increased divisions, increased conflicts, and a lack of creativity. Relationships are essential, and not only between decision makers and communities, but also between organizations, businesses, and community members. So, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about psychology today. When I started my master's degree in conflict resolution, I was a little surprised at the amount of psychology I ended up studying, but it was fascinating and I loved it. And I'm always excited to get to share that with groups, which many of you may have heard of some of these and understand these pretty deeply already, but this will be a good refresher. So, I want to look at some of these processes. These are just three that we're going to highlight today. We have attribution errors, cognitive consistency, and stereotypes. So attribution errors, this is related to assuming someone's behavior reflects their character rather than their circumstances. So it's making quick judgments about somebody based on maybe some external characteristics or maybe their political affiliation, and basically not giving them the benefit of doubt that you would give yourself. That's how I like to think of it. Stereotypes are these generalized beliefs that we have about groups. I'm sure you can all think about some different examples of stereotypes that you've seen. And then cognitive consistency is our tendency to seek information that confirms what we already know. Jess and I were talking about this beforehand, and this is really, I loved how Jess said this. This is our thought that we think we like to learn. We think we want to learn, but really when we get down to our, basic human mind, it's pushing against new information. It's pushing against change. Yes. So I won't talk too much more about these. I was thinking about a couple of examples though. Fundamental attribution error, and I'm going to ask you, there's some sheets on the tables. You don't have to use the sheets, but they're there if you want them, and some paper and some pens. And I'm going to ask you to reflect on these. So I'll give you a couple of examples that I thought of. Fundamental attribution error. So this tendency to overemphasize whatever, personal characteristics over maybe situational things. This one comes up, I feel like, a lot in politics. And so I was thinking about, we've recently had quite a few instances of some of our local elected leaders getting into legal trouble. And I don't know if you've had conversations, maybe some of my Braver Angels people have. I don't know if you've had conversations across the divide when those things happen, but I have. And it's really fascinating to see when it's somebody on your side of the political aisle that may be engaged in whatever illegal activity there was, there's this justification that happens. You're like, well, maybe there was this situation or that situation, like some sort of reason. They must have had a reason that they did that thing, right? But if it's the person on the other side of the political aisle, you're like, get them out of there. Why would they allow that person to continue to be in office and be our elected representative? And it's really hard for people to catch themselves doing that because it's part of our natural processes. It's part of the just way our mind flows. And so it takes some intention and it takes some knowledge. That knowledge that our minds are going to do that is the first step in catching that happening and being able to recognize it, and then being able to make a conscious choice about how we're going to respond and how we're going to talk about a situation. So that's one of the things I would like you to keep in mind as you're thinking about this. And then cognitive consistency. This is interesting, right? So we are motivated to maintain this harmony between our beliefs and our attitudes and our behaviors. Like we want to keep that all running smoothly. We want all those things to align. But we often don't have that harmony because we are always learning new things. There's a lot of information we don't have. So when we obtain some new information, it can be a challenge sometimes, right? How do I make this all harmonize again? I have this new information and my mind doesn't want to take in that new information. It just wants to stay the same. So how do I balance this? I really don't want to have to change my actions or my beliefs. And so often we'll just keep taking in the same information. We see this in social media quite often. I don't know if any of you are on social media, but those algorithms are meant to play off of this particular psychological process. Give you what you want to hear, reinforce what you already believe, give you news sources that support what you might already think about something. One example I thought of personally where I have recognized my own internal struggle related to this. I don't know if any of you are familiar with, there was a controversy in Duluth happening over something called Safe Bay. There is a church that wanted to open up their parking lot to allow people who do not have homes to drive their cars in and stay in their cars between like the hours of 6 p.m. and 10 a.m. or something like that, right? So like a place that they can safely park their vehicles, sleep in their vehicles overnight. And there was all of this outcry that happened from the neighbors surrounding that church. And they said, you know what, we need a fence up, we need security guards patrolling, like we want to have some sense of security if we're gonna have this in our backyard. We have our children here, we want there to be a privacy fence. And so all these barriers to letting this church be able to put that in place. And I don't live near this church. So I, saw the situation happening. I was like, oh, this is, upsetting. These people do not have a place to go. Why are there people in our community that are so opposed to just letting this happen, letting people have this place to park their vehicles? And then one day I was driving home and I drove past a church that is a block from my house. And I have 5 children. I showed you the picture of them. And all of a sudden it hit me. I was like, wait a second. If this were happening at this church that's a block from my house, would I be one of those neighbors? And I had to say, yes, I probably would. I would probably at least be taking a much more critical stance than I currently was. My current stance was very judgmental, and I would have been the neighbor that was like, you know what? I think we should maybe think about, like, is there security? Like, my kids run around this neighborhood. Like, there could be potentially challenging situations that I don't want them to encounter. And so that was an example for me of just having to recognize that it's going to happen all the time. No matter how much you know, no matter how much you practice, you still are going to have those situations where you have to recognize your own cognitive imbalance, and your mind's trying to create that consistency. And then stereotypes, These are pretty common. I won't explain this too much in depth because I feel like there's a general understanding, but this widely held fixed belief, oversimplified images, all Republicans, whatever. I don't even know what the stereotype would be. All Democrats, whatever. And so there's this grouping that happens. And this is also a process our mind does. And it reduces our energy, right? If we don't have to like look at each person in this room as an individual and think about who you are as an individual person, that takes less energy. Like I don't have to like sit and think as nearly as much as, oh, let's have everybody raise their hand. I can sort them into two groups and I know what they believe and I know who they are and their background and where they come from, right? So that's what stereotypes do and are for. And one thing that I wanted to mention when I'm talking about these psychological processes is these are not bad, right? They're not all negative. These are part of our biology, our evolutionary biology, and they're meant to protect us. There may be situations where you need to make an instant decision, and those instincts are there to protect you and to help you. But there are times when they are appropriate to be used, and there are times when we can step away from those instinctual reactions and use our conscious mind to make better decisions. So that's all I want to highlight here, is that piece. One other thing that I wanted to talk about here is psychological safety. So this is really important when we're thinking about inclusion and belonging and creating a welcoming community. Psychological safety is a super important piece of this. I'm going to find my notes here really quickly so I say this correctly. So we conducted a couple of surveys in 2 rural communities in Northeast Minnesota as part of the Rural Minnesota Community Safety Project regarding both experience of physical and psychological safety. So for the purposes of this survey, physical safety was defined as accessibility and the safety of one's body, while psychological safety was defined as emotional well-being and the belief that one can speak up without risk of punishment or humiliation. So the results of these surveys showed that while feelings of physical safety, and I don't have physical safety on here, but I'll just tell you, people felt they were physically safe most of the time in a range of 82 to 98%. Whereas feelings of psychological safety most of the time were just 55% or around there in both communities. So 45% of community members in answering the question, how often do you feel psychologically safe in your daily activities, answered sometimes, rarely, or never. How can we feel at home? And how can we feel a sense of belonging and that we are part of our community when we believe that we will be punished or humiliated if we express ourselves? So that's one of the things that I want us to consider and think about today. But this is also something that we consider when we are designing our programming as well, that I'll talk about a little bit further here. So what do you think? Is experiencing psychological safety in your daily activities important to you? Why or why not? Is there anybody that you can reflect on this question, or if we have any volunteers to answer, we can take some comments as well. Psychological safety, feeling like you can express yourself and really be who you are. Important in your daily activities? Not important? Thoughts on that?
Well, I feel that it's of the utmost importance because feeling unsafe cuts to the core of, being in life itself, and that's very disempowering. So if you feel devalued, it's energy draining you. You don't have the creative resources to participate in your community.
Mm-hmm. So wonderful. Yes, that's a very accurate comment from what I've seen and heard as well. Yeah. So if you're not feeling that psychological safety, how can you actively contribute to your community? Any other thoughts on this?
The elephant in the room is, I just think that across our whole country right now, there is a whole lot of psychological unsafety.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
To expand on that, what it spawns anger,
Mm.
violence, it spawns so many of the troubles that we have these diverse opinions about how to solve.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. So we're seeing some of this manifest maybe in our communities and across our country. Any other comments on this? Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. So we really want to think about then, if there are those negative consequences that most of us could probably point to, and maybe we probably experienced at some point or another in our lives. How do we begin to alleviate that in our communities when we're seeing results showing that there's quite a few people that are experiencing that? There's a comment over here, Jess. Sorry.
We have a microphone to make sure that everyone can hear though in the room as an accessibility feature and also for our Zoom participants. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. Please be patient while I run around.
Well, in my family and in a lot of families, our outlook on political situation is quite different. And also on religion. And we don't talk about them. That's the way we deal with it.
Yeah, thank you. That's an important comment and something to think about. Same in my family, except for that we do talk about them. And, you know, sometimes not talking about them is fine. Like, you need to know those situations where, you know what, we just want to have a good family time together. We don't need to get into something that's going to create conflict. That's fine. But when it comes to our communities, if we just avoid talking about some of these issues that create conflict and really create challenges in our communities, we're not going to get to the solutions that we need. We need, especially, you know, community leaders, but also our community members who are willing to step into some of those conversations and have the skills to step into some of those conversations to be able to make the best decisions for our community. Go ahead.
Well, piggybacking on that other idea, there are things that with some of my friends I don't talk about. And I feel like I'm just chopping off part of myself. And so if I don't talk about this, you know, that's one chunk off. If I don't talk about that, that's another chunk off. And it's not my whole self then that I am relating with another person.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. I very much relate to that comment in different situations. And that is why I do feel like it is important to learn some of those skills. This is going to turn into a Braver Angels pitch. Everybody go to Braver Angels, learn the skills. But learning some of those skills for how to bring those parts of yourself into a conversation, but do it in a way, hopefully that it's received so that they can, you know, accept you. And sometimes, you know, it doesn't always work. Sometimes it takes both of those people learning those skills together as well. I know I saw a comment over here as well.
I will. Yes.
I just wanted to say, thinking about this, that I think we don't always think that we're coming from a place of privilege when we have the ability to mask our differences by maintaining silence. There are people, I think, who tend to be in that position where they feel less safe, maybe even physically, because their differences are visible or able to be detected, and they can't just keep quiet and fit in, whereas I think sometimes we forget.
Yes, absolutely. There is a talk that I gave called Loving the Diversity in Our Hidden Places, because there is this concept that we have people in our communities, when they have visible aspects of diversity that they can't hide, they're facing this constantly. Whereas most of us can, you know, hide pieces of that and don't have to feel quite that sense of exposure. So that's something to be thinking about also when we're thinking about inclusion and belonging.
I have a very intelligent son. And it's a long drive from Minneapolis up to San Diego. And he always is listening to something different on the radio. I've never listened to Doc Logan, whatever his name is. Something completely different. And he's always said, "You're going to look at both sides, Mom. You know, you can't think of a straight line." So I thought it was really quite interesting. A little view that I hadn't even thought of before.
Thank you. No, oh,
I know we have
one
one
down
more
here.
comment over here
Okay.
too. Yes.
I was just thinking about younger people, young adults and children who have so much anxiety and depression right now, and I'm thinking that they don't feel psychologically safe. That there's a lot of pressure to conform to something.
Mhm. Thank you.
Who's over here?
I think it's important to have a relationship with people before you jump into those. You know, we all know the kind of guy you've never met him, and what are you gonna go on that? It's over here. Okay, forget it. I'm going to talk to somebody else. You know, and talk about stuff that, you know, I go to the bars to watch the Vikings games. Well, everybody's a Vikings fan. We talk about that, and then maybe we talk about fishing and the weather, and then if we like each other, we have a relation. Then we can delve into something because we already have, you know, we got some skin in the game. You
Yes.
know, but to talk to a complete stranger and jump right into that stuff, I led some kayaking tours and stuff, and we kind of had to deal with. The group gets together the first night. We don't talk politics or religion. We talk about the things that we have in common, and then by the end of the week, the people you like, then you can talk to them about them more.
Yes, that relationship piece is so important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Though I would say with Brave Angels, you might be talking with complete strangers about very conflicting subjects, but if there's some really good ground rules in place, it can actually work. So
Are you going to address how to create your own psychological systems and then model that as part of that?
if you have a comment on that you'd like to share, I'd be very welcome to hear it.
The question for those that couldn't hear is that she's asking if she was going to address how to create your own psychological safety and or model that.
Did you have a thought on that you wanted to share?
Well, I think so much of the underlying commonality of being a human being and what is entailed in being safe and being psychologically safe, we have so much more in common than our diversity. And if I can inventory myself and achieve a stable sense of psychological safety, it's like, okay, so I fell on my head and my brain is broken. I'm functioning well enough. You know, I'm not devaluing my own existence, you know, creating my own psychological safety and then extending that to others. More of, can I look for what we have in common?
Absolutely.
And that these other things are really not so important in the big picture.
Wonderful comment. So finding those common areas, that's something that things that we can work around, and those are things also that continue to build our relationships when we are able to do that. We'll take one more comment here.
I think one of the difficult things right now is that to create psychological safety, we tend to find and bond with people who share our beliefs. And that has been working for a long time because we could accept that other people didn't agree with us, and that was okay. They were still human beings. And today that division is tripped into a demonization sort of thing, where the fear is actually amplified by some of our leaders, and that creates more of a division, which undermines the safety you're seeking. That's a real challenge.
Thank you so much. That is such an important comment, and something that we talk about a lot in conflict resolution is when we see those divisions, when we are unable to see those people who maybe have significant differences than us as the same value of their humanity, that's where we really get into trouble. And so those relationships are really important to continue to be able to see the humanity in one another. Thank you. Those were wonderful comments. Ooh, this group could have a great conversation, I can see. I'm going to bring us back a little bit. So how does this relate to economic development? How does this relate to creating inclusive and welcoming communities? So one of the activities that I had here on the table, we probably won't take the time to do this, but I'm going to put these questions up here. You know, when we're thinking about the success of our communities into the future, we need to realize that there might be people in our communities that aren't feeling that sense of psychological safety. We need to realize there are people in our communities, especially those from some of those historically underrepresented backgrounds, that constantly have their differences maybe on display and are really feeling that lack of safety as well. And so thinking about the experiences of those outside of ourselves is really important, as well as some of those psychological pieces that we talked about that relate to how maybe we're thinking about situations happening, how we're proactively addressing situations that are happening. So these are a couple of reflection questions. You're welcome to take those sheets that I handed out with you and think about these later, but I'm just going to read through these just to give us a second to consider them. Think of a recent moment of tension or misunderstanding in your life. What happened? How did you feel? What assumptions did you make about the other person or group involved? Were these based on past experiences, stereotypes, maybe limited information? Looking back, what might have influenced their behavior that you didn't consider? And how could you approach a similar situation in the future? So this thought process, this reflection practice is something that you can use. I often use this when I feel myself getting really upset about something. Maybe there's something going on in my community and I don't know if you're familiar with the window of tolerance, but window of tolerance is kind of when you're cool, calm, collected, and connected. You're in the center, you're emotionally kind of centered and stable. And when we get out of that, we get, maybe depressed or we get really angry. We're out of that window of tolerance. And so I notice sometimes when I'm out of that window of tolerance, there's some situation that might be happening. And I use this reflection tool to think about, how am I seeing this situation? Where maybe there's some psychological processes that are happening, that are in play, that I'm unconsciously judging this situation or this individual unfairly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the programming efforts that Northspan has done to address some of these situations in our rural communities. And is we really try to focus on research-based best practices. I'm sure most of you are aware of the pushback to diversity, equity, and inclusion programming that has happened in the last couple of months. Well, the programming that we've been doing for the past 4 years across Northeast Minnesota often fell into that category, right? And so we really, focused on what are the research-based best practices that people, maybe could look at our program and say, well, this isn't great. You're doing this programming, but we've heard all these negative reports of the problems with DEI programming, and we want to be able to have that research base to come back and say, you know what, this is programming that has been proven by research to be effective in our communities, because there are DEI programming that increase backlash. That's not a surprise. We just talked about these psychological processes, right? So there is DEI programming that might be out there that people have taken part in, that they leave feeling angry and upset and more prone to whatever biased or discriminatory behaviors they may have come into that programming with. And so we know this, right? The research has shown this. And so we can look at that program and say, okay, we know what to avoid. And we can look at other programming that we've seen change. We've seen significant positive change in bias and discriminatory attitudes. Let's look at that and use those tools in our programming. So a couple of these that I want to talk about really briefly: centering autonomy. So when I was passing out sheets at the beginning, some people were asking if it was mandatory. Not mandatory, because that's one of those practices that produces backlash. So it is your choice how much and where and when you want to engage with whatever element of the programming we're doing, right? Exemplifying authenticity. So what I just shared with you about there is DEI programming that can have negative impacts. That's an example of exemplifying authenticity. If I were to stand up here and say, you know what, I do DEI work and it always works and it's always effective and nobody should ever have any question about the work that we're doing, that would be the opposite of exemplifying authenticity. That would be trying to tell you a narrative and a story that I want you to believe, but that's not based in reality. And that most people in this room would listen to that and say, you know what, something's not right there. And so then there's that loss of trust that happens. Empowering and sharing research-based examples of success. This is just looking at things that have happened in other communities, in other programming, and finding out where that has been successful and being able to highlight those stories to share, because when we can see ourselves in other stories. And then amplifying pluralism. This is something I really love about our programming, because we in Northeast Minnesota, you know, if we're talking about racial diversity, we're not a super diverse group. We have like, I think 93, 94% white. So when we're looking at some of those outer aspects of diversity, we might not see a lot of that. But when we're talking about amplifying pluralism, we're talking about the value of the differences of every person in this room. So you might look around and be like, how many differences do we have? But when we get into conversation, when we're talking about that psychological safety piece, being able to share our full selves, we realize we have a lot more differences, but we also have those commonalities, right? So what are those threads of commonality? And then what are those differences and how do we value them? So every person that participates, you know, in our programming, we try to amplify that value. If you are an old white man, we want you to participate. We want you to be there, and we want you to lend your perspective. If you are from a historically underrepresented group, you're a member of our BIPOC community, we want you to be there. We want you to participate. You have just as much value as anybody else in that room and in that space. So this is one of the examples of some of the programming that we've done. Deer River, Minnesota was one of the last places we did something called an inclusion learning cohort. And we've done 4 of these across Northeast Minnesota. We're trying to do one in every county in the 7-county region of Northeast Minnesota. And this was one of our last ones. So this town of just 900 people, the ILC brought together people from all different walks of life. It was a pretty small group. I think we had maybe 12 people that were part of that cohort that met on a regular basis. It was twice a month. They listened deeply, they learned together, and then launched a community-led project to show all of the wonderful learning that was happening around Indigenous culture in their community school. So the celebration of culture is what this picture is from, brought together over 200 people in the community to learn about this different, you know, learning experiences and culture that was happening right in their community that many people may not have even known about. We had conversations on policing and local law enforcement. We had the local tribal chief of police, the Deer River chief of police, and the Itasca County Sheriff all together answering questions from the community about challenges maybe that community members had seen with policing, or things maybe that they'd seen on a national level and wanted answers from on a local level. But being able to have that conversation at the local level was just so impactful for that community. We have, let me switch the slide here, the ABCs of constructive dialogue. This is something we start out all of our inclusion learning cohorts with. And I'll read these because I know it's probably hard to see in the back of the room. A, ask to understand their perspective. B, break down our own view so they understand our reasoning. And C, check our understanding of their perspective. So that's the ABCs. We partner with a national organization called Urban Rural Action to facilitate these in each of our inclusion learning cohort communities. And the inclusion learning cohort, just as a broad overview, is a series of 6 or 7 workshops really specifically tailored to the needs of the local area. So we're doing one in Lake County right now, for instance. We start with a team of individuals who are local to that community from a variety of sectors. So think, you know, healthcare and nonprofits and business and schools, all of these different individuals that have knowledge of the community are pulled together to be part of this core team. Then we distribute a survey to the community and talk about inclusion and belonging. Where are you seeing this in your community? Where are you seeing it work well? Where are some gaps? And then that informs what the workshops are based on, except for this first one. The first one is always the ABCs, because we know we're going to be having some conversations that we want people to have those skills to be able to work with. So one of the things I wanted to talk about really quickly, I know I'm going to run out of time here, is sometimes we're doing welcoming and we have great inclusion and belonging things happening in our communities that we don't always recognize. I was at an event with this business, Rock Speed FX. They create motorsports products. And listening to their story, I was like, oh my goodness, they are doing welcoming work and they probably don't even realize it. So Chris Olin is the owner of Rock Speed FX, and I was able to meet with him and talk about the work that he's doing, because he creates accommodating motorsports products. So maybe, you know, he said, you have motorsports products that are usually created for an average size male. So maybe a male, 5'10", 200 pounds, maybe that's the average. And that's what all of those products are created for. And he said, we wanted our wives and our children, people of different sizes and abilities to be able to ride. And so we, you know, created handlebar risers to change the height of the handlebars, or seat risers to adjust the height of the seat, or grips where our kids could, you know, grip on with their knees if their feet couldn't reach the bottom. And I was like, that is such a wonderful analogy of the work we're trying to do in creating inclusive, you know, welcoming communities. Such a great analogy. And so he's actually presented with me on at least one occasion now, because it's just been such a good connection. So then the other piece, we talked about learning to understand ourselves, but then what about learning to understand one another? Relationships are key. Appreciated that comment so much. We need to break the bubbles, those silos that we heard about of we're often only engaging with people we agree with. And be curious. That's such an important piece. Being able to hear something and feeling maybe that tension rise, but to pause for a minute, take a breath, and lean in and say, tell me more. Why do you think that way? Why do you believe that way? What led you to this place, right? That curiosity is so important in creating psychologically safe communities that are then welcoming and inclusive communities as well. This is another activity. So this is the one, if you want, there are Post-it notes on the back by those giant Post-it notes. There's some little Post-it notes. There's also some on the table here, but we'll just think about this for now since we're a little short on time. You know, when we're thinking about creating relationship building, you know, actions, these are some ideas that I came up with. I was going to ask you to, you know, add to this list. So thinking about all of these different ideas for how we can create welcoming communities on a personal level, and then sort them into categories. Which ones are easily doable? Which ones maybe are rising in difficulty, and which ones are really challenging? So this is kind of a good practice just to do on your own, and then think about like, what are some things that you can choose to do in your community? You can see things like smile and wave, learn about an unfamiliar culture or religion, offer to meet somebody's need, say hello, invite somebody to a coffee shop, introduce yourself, individual reflection on your beliefs and actions. So these are some different ideas of those different levels of engagement that we can have in our communities, and especially with those who might be different than us. So I talked a little bit about the inclusion learning cohorts. These are some of the other programming pieces that Northspan has been involved in and related to creating welcoming communities over the past 4 years. Equity Summit, maybe some of you have heard of or attended that. That's typically been held in Virginia. Lyceums are another way of community conversation. Intercultural Development Inventory, or IDI. This is really understanding how an individual relates across difference. It's an assessment tool that's used. And then the individual debriefs with a certified administrator. So this is something we used with our community leaders. We were able to offer that for free. And some of these other pieces you see here as well. I might skip over a couple of my stories here because I'm going to run out of time. But this is a cool just experience that I had of sitting on, you know, the steps outside of the city hall in Duluth and seeing this building, these buildings next to each other, and really noticing the detail on this one. And, you know, just kind of the plainness of this other one. You know, that one's functional. It serves a purpose. It was probably a lot easier to build. Didn't take the investment and time. But when we're thinking about this as an analogy for our communities, which one do we want to look like? And I would highly prefer this one, but this one takes some investment. This one takes some time. This one takes more than just, you know, coasting along with our psychological processes. This one might take some self-reflection. And I talked a little bit about the inclusion learning cohorts already, but this is really the goal of those: building relationships, providing opportunities to talk about these gaps in inclusion in our community, and then embarking on projects together. And these are some of the topics we've seen come up. Like I said, these are very unique to each community: political diversity, exploring the born here, not from here perspective, Native American cultural knowledge, sharing history, lots of different topics. This is some feedback we've received from those, which I won't spend time on here. And then I did want to talk really briefly just about one of our newest programming. I talked about the Lake County Inclusion Learning Cohort that we're doing. Something new that we're doing is called the Elected Leaders Learning Cohort. And I would encourage you, if you know of any elected leaders, nonpartisan elected leaders. So we're starting this with, you know, school board, city council, commissioners, those nonpartisan elected leaders are welcome to participate in this. And these are some of the topics we'll be talking about. We'll be doing the ABCs of constructive dialogue, which is really important. But we'll also be talking about, you know, data, how to look at data and use data to make best decisions. We hope to have a really diverse group of individuals in this cohort participating so that they're learning from one another and building some of those strong relationships that will help them make better decisions in our communities. If you have any local elected leaders that you have kind of a personal connection with that you want to nominate, feel free to connect us via email. My email is up here, alewis@northspan.org. If anybody needs that after, just come up to me and I will get you a business card. But we would love to have some elected leaders from this area participate. This is for the 7-county region. We'll be meeting in different locations. One of our meetings is going to be at Fortune Bay, but then we'll have different locations across Northeast Minnesota. And this will be on a monthly basis, starting in September, actually. The ABCs of constructive dialogue, the first meeting is September 25th. All right, I'm gonna skip over just a couple of these. I will end with this one. Learning to communicate, because we heard about relationships being so important and we heard about the silos that often happen. I was in a training with an Ojibwe elder, and he was talking about how he teaches the language, and he was talking about somebody might come up to him sometimes who's speaking the Ojibwe language and he doesn't, you know, understand him right away. He said something. He said this quote that I probably should find the actual quote, but I can give you the gist of it. He said, "We need to be in relationship to be able to understand one another." And I thought, oh my goodness, that's so true. You know, I thought about I have my kids up here because my little 5-year-old, you know, one day we were driving somewhere and she said, "I want to go to ostrich." I said, "I don't know what you're saying. What do you mean you want to go to ostrich?" And we were trying to figure out what was this word. If you have kids or grandkids, you've probably seen that happen. And my husband, you know, he's been spending more time with her. He was kind of stay-at-home dad for a while. And he said, "Hawk's Ridge" or Hawk Ridge. And she goes, "Yeah." And, you know, he was able to figure out what she was saying because he knew her, right? And he knew the places that she's been and the things that she likes. And when it comes to others in our community who might be different from us, that's really the place we need to get to where we know them well enough that we can really understand what they're saying and where they're coming from. So that's our part. Support community spaces of psychological safety. Welcome openness and authenticity in your conversations and engage with curiosity. We create the community we want. And I just end with this hockey picture of these hockey teams coming together because I thought this was such a beautiful image of this difference coming together that you might not expect. This was at our last state hockey tournament. But thank you so much for listening. I hope I'm not too much over time, maybe a minute. But thank you for being here. This is a great group and I've loved engaging with you.